Democracy at the global level. In this module, you will learn about democracy at the international level and its functioning through various global agencies. Earlier you have learned about democratic system of different countries and the spread of democracy across the world in the 20th century. However, have you ever wondered how it functions in the global level? In the absence of a world government that regulates and preserves the global commons, who has the control over areas that fall outside the boundaries of a country? Well, these functions are carried out by several international institutions such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. The United Nations is an international organization that was formed to promote international cooperation, security, and economic development. The UN is authorized to take a call on issues pertaining to the global commons. Any such decisions taken by the UN on such issues are therefore binding to all the nations. The UN General Assembly is the only organ of the organization where all the member nations have equal representation. Currently, the Assembly has 192 members and each of them has one vote. So, the UN General Assembly is supposed to follow a democratic philosophy. However, in case of a conflict between the member nations, the General Assembly is not authorized to take a decision. Such decisions are then taken by the Security Council, which is another organ of the UN. The UN Security Council consists of 15 members, of which 5 are permanent and 10 are elected by the General Assembly. The permanent members, comprising the United States of America, Russia, United Kingdom, France, and China, have the privilege of veto. This implies that any decision of the Council requires the concurrence of these 5 countries before it can be passed. The veto power of the permanent members has been a contentious issue due to allegations of its misuse by the big powers for vested interests. This led many countries to protest and demand democratization of the processes of the Security Council. Apart from the UN, other agencies like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund (IMF) help their member countries deal with financial situations. However, unlike the UN General Assembly, members of the IMF do not have equal voting rights. Instead, the voting rights in the IMF are determined by the monetary contribution of the member countries to the IMF. This provision makes the decision-making process of IMF totally undemocratic. The undemocratic nature of the IMF is reflected in the fact that most of the decisions of the agency are taken by just 7 of the total 173 member states. These countries, which include the US, UK, France, Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, and Japan, control nearly half of the voting power in the IMF. Although the nations worldwide promote democracy, the actual trends in the international organizations do not offer an encouraging picture. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the United States of America is the only remaining superpower in the world. The US, therefore, dominates the global scenario, which ultimately affects the working of the global organizations adversely. However, recent years have witnessed the emergence of several global movements around the world opposing war and the US dominance. These movements have also promoted the need for global democracy. A fundamental question can be raised about the method of promoting democracy in the world. Some political analysts and scholars believe that it is the duty of the democratic countries to intervene and establish democracy in non-democratic countries. However, This approach has often resulted in gross human rights violation and disregard for the will of the indigenous population and the decisions of international agencies. Experiences from past incidences teach us that democracy must reflect the will of the people. External efforts to install democracy will only be fruitful if there is an internal urge for democracy emerging from within the country. Let's recall what we have learned. Decisions and law about the global commons and areas lying outside the boundaries of a country are taken by international agencies like the United Nations. The UN General Assembly functions as the parliament of the organization. Every member has one vote in the General Assembly. This makes the UN an ostensibly democratic organization. However, the actual decision-making power of the UN resides with the Security Council, comprising of 5 permanent members and 10 elected members. The permanent members have the power to veto any decision of the Council. Often misuse of this privilege by the big powers forced other members to protest and demand democratization of UN proceedings. The International Monetary Fund is a body that helps nations deal with financial situations. Voting rights in the IMF is determined by the monetary contribution of each country to the agency. Since the fall of Soviet Union, the US has emerged as the sole superpower. This dominance of America also influences the working of the international organizations. Numerous people movements have emerged in recent years to demand promotion of global democracy. In the past decades, several powerful countries have taken up the onus of establishing democracy in non-democratic countries with grave consequences. External aid in establishing democracy in a country can be successful only when there is a movement for democracy emerging from within the country.